Thank you, and it's really great to be here at this event. As many of you know, I've been involved in the Catapult since its former existence as the Transport Systems Catapult, and actually to see the growth of the community and the breadth of the community that engages with events like we're having today is really, really important and absolutely essential if we're going to deliver the innovation that the transport system needs. So I'm going to talk to you about how we can accelerate innovation in transport. And I just wanted to sort of bring to light, first of all, the challenges that we are addressing within the transport sector, and think about some of the solutions we've been trying, often in partnership with the Connected Places Catapult and others within this room. But then I'm also really interested in the discussion that follows on from that. So let's think about what we're tackling within transport. As I say in many of my talks, transport is undergoing an existential change unlike anything we have seen in the past 100 years. We are seeing disruption to everything, from the relationship between drivers in vehicles and those vehicles themselves, to a dramatic change in the types of fuels that are being used within our transport system, to the impact of climate change and the way in which we're seeing the performance and the response of our transport infrastructure changing in a way that we haven't seen before. So as we're moving from changes around future fuels, future infrastructure, future vehicles, and then also the changes in our travellers and the choices that travellers are making, the changes in demographics, the absolute need for us to improve accessibility of our transport system, we need to understand all of this from a whole systems perspective. But we've got lots of technologies coming down the line. We've got technologies ranging from quantum technologies, semiconductors, robotics, neurotechnologies. How can we make sure that the technology innovations that we know are developing through scientific discovery are pulled through to deliver innovation with impact within our transport system? So, in other words, what are the ingredients for innovation? I didn't realise when I took on the role as Chief Scientific Advisor that I would decide to spend one of my Sunday evenings trying to work out how to represent quantum entanglement in cake form. But what I wanted to do was, first of all, think about the different types of innovation approaches we've used, and secondly, then think, well, what is it about those innovation approaches that has been working, and how do we really make sure that we can deliver them at scale? So what are the ingredients for innovation? So the first example I want to pull from is our Transport Research Innovation Grants programme. Many of you are familiar with the Transport Research Innovation Grants. These are small awards that are made to innovators around the ecosystem, and many of you in the room are those innovators or are people involved in developing this programme. And what the Transport Research Innovation Grants do is identify technologies that have the opportunity to develop across 1 or 2 technology readiness levels and be deployed in a transport setting. And we run the programme each year, but have different themes and different approaches depending on what the policy needs of the system are at the time. Some examples here are Make Sense technology, which was a technology to help visually impaired individuals in navigating urban environments. And particularly thought about how we could use sort of haptic technologies to support that. And a really impressive solution was that, or a really impressive outcome, was that Make Sense technology, as a result of some of the learning and some of the opportunity they were able to demonstrate through the Transport Research Innovation Grant, were then able to secure £2.5 million in external investment and are aiming to bring the project to market within 18 months. What that shows is that a relatively small amount of investment can deliver the confidence to then enable that larger, more significant external investment from the private sector. Similarly, U-Smart Thing is a deployment that specialises in personalised travel planning, particularly for large events, and helps to think about the different nuances of different user needs and the bringing accessibility to the heart of that decision-making. Again, through the engagement with the Transport Research Innovation Grants, have been able to then position themselves to be deployed for use in major events. So what are the ingredients that are working in the Transport Research Innovation Grants, which our analysis has shown us that when we look at the programme as a whole, £7.9 million worth of investment over a 4-year period has yielded £80 million in follow-on government funding and £89 million from the private sector. So I think there are 3 things that are really important in this programme. The first is, when I speak to the people who've been funded through this programme, they don't talk about the money very much. The money's important, but it's actually not the most important bit. The most important bit is the connections they make with government policymakers, the connections they make with those who are delivering the transport systems. The second thing they talk about is confidence. The badge of recognition by the Department for Transport means that they then have the confidence and the credibility to be able to work with those external partners and take the evidence of their innovations forward. And the final thing is communication. Transport is a fiendishly difficult sector to work with. And if any of you were at the Interchange event a couple of weeks ago, I talked about the weaponisation of the acronym. And the fact that sometimes I think we delight in the mystery of the transport sector. We make it deliberately confusing because we've worked so hard to be part of it. We want to demonstrate our badge of honour of understanding what a SPAD is and what a PICOP is. We need to stop that. We need to recognise that actually this is a really hard sector to enter, and that one of the things we can do is make sure that those who haven't necessarily thought of the transport sector as an area for them to innovate in feel comfortable and confident in doing that. So let's talk about something on a completely different scale. The UK Shore programme was a £200 million investment that was funded in the spending review in 2021. And it was funded because it recognised, sorry, I'm on a very creaky bit of floor here, and I'm incapable of standing still. It was funded because it recognised that the maritime sector had a need to work together to decarbonise its technology. Maritime is responsible for a relatively small percentage of our domestic emissions, but it is a quite diffuse sector. It has lots and lots of small and medium-sized enterprises within it, and it is hard to decarbonise. There is not a single winning technology that is coming through within the maritime space. We're seeing everything from hydrogen to ammonia to sustainable liquid fuels being explored as solutions, as well as electrification on a smaller scale. What UK Shore has done is worked with the industry at scale. So through allocation of £200 million to over 150 projects, it supported over 300 organisations, including 200 small and medium-sized enterprises, leveraged £100 million worth of investment, and has created a significant number of jobs as well. So thinking about the jobs that are created, thinking about the industries that are supported, and also thinking about the place-based innovation. Many of our innovators who are working in maritime are in ports, in coastal communities, which we know are areas that tend to experience higher levels of socioeconomic disadvantage. So the ingredients here, it's that engagement with the sector and the community, empowering the sector to take ownership of this challenge and helping the sector to navigate through the policy challenge of decarbonisation. It's encouraging the ownership of the challenge within that sector, and it's encouraging the ambition. I was chatting to someone before, and before I was in this job, I didn't do anything with the maritime sector. The maritime sector hadn't been as high priority and high profile within my transport research as an academic in the university. So thinking about raising the ambition of decarbonisation within maritime is a further opportunity. And then the final example that I want to pull through is around culture. And the best example that I've seen of building a culture of innovation is through the accelerator programs that have been run by the Connected Places Catapult and others. The accelerator programs are much, much more about community. They're about bringing people together within a dedicated supply chain or a dedicated infrastructure system and helping them become part of the team, helping them to see how their technologies can really make a difference. The example I've showed on the slide here includes the work of Cloud Cycle, who looked at digitization of the concrete slump test and demonstrated that they were able to provide a 100,000-hour reduction in the time taken to check and monitor the quality of concrete being used in HS2, and deliver a 25 to 35 million reduction in potential cost. I met someone at breakfast who's been funded by the most recent iteration of the HS2 Innovator Programme. And Harry Yates was telling me about his company, Build Prompt, who have developed a digital handover solution for HS2. Through working as part of the organisation, they've reduced the time taken for a process that was previously taking 2 weeks to 30 seconds and demonstrated a saving of 5 million over 3 years. But the critical ingredients there have been about being part of the community, being able to work on a very detailed nugget within a process, and building trust within the system as well. So hopefully that's been a bit of a sort of provocation or opening discussion for us to all think about, well, what do we need to do in the future to continue this pathway to innovation? And I really look forward to the questions from Erika and from the rest of you throughout the next 2 days. Thank you. What should we sit?
Great. Thank you very much, Sarah. That was really, really interesting. And I loved your fairy cakes. They looked great. Can you start by, well, we allow questions to come in, so do put your questions on Slido, folks. Can we start by you giving us a little bit of a rundown on those game-changing technologies that we should be thinking about now in transport?
Yeah. So I think the obvious one that I'm actually not going to talk about too much is artificial intelligence. I think that we've recognised within the UK the opportunity around artificial intelligence, the importance of taking a responsible approach to AI, and I'm seeing lots of fantastic work happening within the sector in that area. So I wanted to pull out 2 others that I think are potentially the next ones that are coming down the line. The first is quantum technology. Quantum technology is an area where the UK genuinely has opportunity to provide international leadership through the incredible investment that's been made over a decade now in fundamental research expertise in quantum technologies. Quantum technologies will play out in 2 ways in transport. The first is it will completely transform the way in which we can sense infrastructure and systems. We know from all too painful experiences how difficult it can be finding unexpected things happening within our transport infrastructure. And quantum really is starting to show very, very strong evidence of its ability to transform the way in which we can understand the physical infrastructure that is critical to delivery of our transport system. But also quantum computing is going to present us with both a challenge and opportunity. It's going to present us with a challenge because it's going to present all sorts of changes to the ways in which we need to protect our transport systems from a cybersecurity perspective. But the opportunity is we really will start to be able to deal with the vast volumes of data we have in transport at scale.
Those sound brilliant. We're getting some questions in, so I'm going to come to those in a moment. But we've been working with you, obviously, and you've mentioned us a lot in your speech, so thank you very much. What do you see as the value of working with the Catapult?
But one of the things I said before was it's actually about partnerships. So actually within the Department for Transport, we've got a number of scientists and engineers. We've got a number of people who are experts in innovation. But those people are vastly outnumbered with others doing really important work around policy, regulation, and just the delivery of an organisation like the Department for Transport. So we need all the minds we can possibly have in helping us to bring innovation into the transport system. But I think the other thing that the Catapult and other organisations really, really bring is that laser-sharp focus on the external market. And actually, government, if the system's working really, really well, government shouldn't have to invest anything, really, in innovation because the ecosystem should work so beautifully that everything happens organically. And so getting that intelligence that we get from the very close relationships, I think, that the Catapult has with the sector, particularly those innovators who are coming in new to the sector, I think is really, really helpful. And we've seen lots of examples where they're learning not just from the programs on which we're directly working with the Connected Places Catapult on, but actually all of the other pieces of work that are happening is really, really helpful for us.
One of the things that I know that we found is that where we can run trials and tests and then actually look to put people directly into supply chains, that is
Yeah.
a really powerful way to help innovators be successful. How can we do more of that?
I mean, I used the example of the accelerators earlier. I think that we need to get the right approach to risk within the sector. All too often, we do the thing that we've always done because that's what we know, and the thought of us changing a safety case, the thought of us changing a procurement process is just too painful for anyone to stomach. And that's a completely natural human practical reaction. But we need to recognise that sometimes if we don't actually think about how the long term, and Andrew Haynes said it this morning, he talked about, and I was really pleased to hear him talk about the opportunity that GBR brings to take a true systems approach. Taking a true systems approach, as I've said very many times, is something that sounds terribly sensible in principle, is really hard to make happen in practice. And I think recognising that actually we do need to go sometimes through that painful process of changing the people we work with, changing the ways we work, and we need to introduce a little bit of managed risk within the system if we're going to introduce the new materials that are going to come through and the new technologies that are going to come through.
Yeah, I mean, really interesting, I think, in terms of reducing that kind of focus on, total focus on risk. There's a really nice question here that's a sort of a woman's question, actually. What would be your biggest piece of advice to women pursuing careers in transport innovation?
Recognise your superpower would be the biggest advice I would have. There's no difference between the capability that women have and men have, but sometimes we can either have experienced difficult challenges in our career that knock our confidence or make us feel like we're not part of the gang. I travelled this morning to the London Stock Exchange on the Waterloo and City line. That was not a place of great diversity. And honestly, even I sort of felt, gosh, this is not a place for me. And sometimes that's what it feels like. Recognise that the true power of innovation is through diversity of thought, confidence in ideas. When you're at an event, don't just go and speak to the other women. Speak to the people who look really interesting, who may well be the other women, of course, and just sort of build that confidence. And also learn from a variety of different role models would be the other thing I'd say. One of the things I've been most pleased by is the different styles of men and women who lead. Don't feel that you have to fit into a particular mould of anyone who you see sitting up on a stage like this. Think about what you could bring to that space.
I think that's great advice. I think that's true. And one of the things I always think about looking back on my career is if you look back on my career now from this end, it looks like it was actually quite nicely organised. But actually from the front end, it wasn't like that at all. It was very opportunistic, and I, grabbed things that I thought looked interesting. And I think, the same in any kind of sector. You do have a superpower. Think about what your superpower is. See how you can kind of take that through your career. I would absolutely agree. There's a really interesting question about failure. With early stage innovation, is failure seen as good or bad? And how does that work?
So learning from failure is good. One of the reasons that we manage programs like the Transport Research Innovation Grants in a portfolio is we recognise that not every technology will succeed. It's really interesting from the evaluation we've done, because what that shows us is that some technologies succeed spectacularly and some don't, but everyone learns from the process. And so I think recognising that actually some of the best decisions you can make in your innovation journey is stopping doing something that isn't working quite as well and moving to another direction is really important.
There's a really interesting question here, I think, from my point of view, and it builds on the things you were saying about how we can think about regulation and safety in a different way, and that's about, standards actually are a real government lever for change. How could we use standards, do you think, to kickstart innovation?
Yeah, we've seen some really good examples of use of standards in, for example, decarbonisation of construction or implementation of connected and automated plant in construction. And I'll be honest, before I came into this role, I think I was a bit naive about the power of standards. Some of the great things about standards, and particularly some of the sort of more community-led standards like the PAS, is they actually don't need the painful process of going through parliamentary cycles and government processes and secondary legislation and all of those sorts of things. But also they're informed and governed by the community. Now, of course, within transport, we have different levels of freedom around standards in the different modes. So construction is something where we've got a lot of opportunity for innovation from a UK perspective, whereas aviation and maritime, actually, we have the really important interactions with ICAO and the International Maritime Organization that we need to link into. I think that raising the profile of what standards can do is a really good call, and it's something that I still think I need to learn about and engage with even more than we are already doing.
Great. There is an aviation question, actually.
Excellent.
So you mentioned building innovation-driven communities generally. What would you like to see, or what communities would you like to see in the aviation innovation sector?
So aviation is really interesting. It's really interesting because you've got aviation, which is almost the delivery of experience of air travel, and then you've got the aerospace industry, which is absolutely essential to the UK economy, actually. And so I think that sometimes we focus so much on the aerospace industry that we forget about some of the opportunities for aviation. I think there are a couple of areas for innovation. The first is airport operations. So one of the things I mentioned on my first slide is future fuels, and the changes that we're seeing coming through in fuels in aircraft within the next 5 years. So we're going to see sustainable aviation fuels coming through. We're going to see increased use of electrification, and we may start to see presence of hydrogen in certain locations as well. Actually, both logistically and from an engineering perspective, having multiple fuels in a single site is quite a challenge, and we need to think about that really carefully. But in one of my other talks, I show a slide of improvements in air quality in London over the last decade. And when you look at air quality in London, you see a little bit of a red blob in the centre, and then you see a blob on the left-hand side, which is Heathrow. So there are some real issues still around air quality and airport operations, and that's both from the vehicles as part of the airport operations, and then, of course, the vehicles travelling to airports. So I think actually thinking about air quality and environmental impacts of aviation is an area that's really important as well.
I would completely agree.
There's a terrifying number of questions
I know,
on the screen, by the way.
So many questions for you, Sarah.
Yeah.
This is quite an interesting one. I think we've probably got time for a couple more, so if you want to add to this list, please keep going. So Lorna Pimlott spoke in a previous session about the government looking at alternatives to grants and thinking about revenue generating, a revenue generating model. How do you think that would apply to innovation in the transport sector?
So one of the things we often hear is we know that we've got some blockers that are specific to the transport sector that, to be honest, we need all the help of the people in the room to overcome. Transport can be a sector where it takes quite a long time for technologies to bring through the economic return on investment that typical venture capital organisations look for. If you compare to the speed of scale-up that you see in the business sort of commercial sector or creative arts, for example, sometimes it can just take a lot longer to deploy technologies and deliver that return on investment in transport. The second thing that I think is a real challenge within transport is actually our regulatory context, for very good reason, that requires testing at scale. And we often hear from innovators that they really struggle to be able to demonstrate at scale. So I think that thinking about the solutions that enable us to help small and medium-sized enterprises or innovators come through with the evidence that shows demonstration of impact of innovation at scale is something that we really need to look to partnership with organisations like the National Wealth Fund and others to help us with.
Yeah, I think, absolutely. I've got one last question, and I thought this was quite a good one to finish on, and that's about, as an innovator in government, and I don't know how it felt arriving in government, probably a little bit stodgy. What do you think the biggest challenge is to promoting innovation in government?
I don't struggle to communicate that innovation is a really good idea. People get that we need to change. Everyone gets that we need to change. When we use the standard benefit cost ratio analyses and things like this, innovation comes out really, really strongly. We need to be realistic that there's practical business of delivery of day-to-day activity that often, for completely understandable reasons, dominates. And so helping to make the argument for what the right proportion of spend of both time and resource is on innovation, I think is a really important challenge for all of us to work on.
I think that's a great way to end a really brilliant session. Thank you so much, Sarah, for spending time with us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll hand it back to Alison. Yeah.